The fire chief gave the order at 6:47 in the morning, and every single firefighter on scene heard it clearly. No one goes above floor 12. The building is compromised. It is a death trap above that line. Everyone acknowledged. Everyone nodded. Everyone complied. Except one 23-year-old Probie standing at the back of the crowd who went very, very still, because he alone had heard something no one else had. 3 faint taps, then 2, then 3 again, it coming from somewhere high above the roaring wall of smoke. Floor 37, he was certain of it, and what happened next would change the Chicago Fire Department forever. His name was Danny Kowalski, and nobody at Station 41 had any particular reason to think much of him. He had been assigned to the house 8 months earlier, fresh out of the academy, the youngest member of the crew by nearly 6 years. He was quiet in the way that reads as nervous. He double-checked equipment that veterans had already cleared. He asked questions during briefings that the senior guys answered with barely disguised impatience. Lieutenant Ray Cortez, a 17-year veteran with a jaw like a cinder block and zero tolerance for what he called academic firefighting, had summed up the general feeling about Danny Kowalski in the break room one Tuesday afternoon with brutal economy. "Kid knows the textbook," Cortez had said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Doesn't know anything real." Nobody disagreed. Nobody defended him either. Danny had been standing just outside the doorway when it happened, holding a mug of coffee he never ended up drinking. He set it down quietly on the nearest surface and went back to the apparatus floor to check his gear. Again. That was 8 months ago. In those 8 months, Danny had responded to 42 calls. He had performed competently on all 42. Not spectacularly, competently. He carried hose. He cleared rooms. He followed orders exactly as given. He never freelanced, never improvised, never pushed past the boundary of what he was told to do. Cortez had started calling him the robot, which the rest of the crew had picked up with the enthusiastic cruelty that tight-knit groups sometimes deploy against the one who doesn't quite fit. But there was something about Danny Kowalski that nobody at Station 41 knew. Something he had taken very deliberate steps to make sure they would never find out. The building was called the Harwick Tower, and on the morning of November 14th it was burning from the inside out. The alarm had come in at 6:22. A fire reported on floors 8 through 11, a catastrophic HVAC failure that had ignited a chemical storage room used by a commercial cleaning company operating out of Suite 812. The chemicals had fed the fire in ways that normal suppression couldn't predict. By the time Engine 41 and Truck 41 arrived on scene at 6:31, smoke was already banking out of windows on floors 9, 10, and 11 simultaneously. Incident Command was establishing itself fast. 3 other engine companies were incoming. The building was 40 floors tall, 19 years old, mixed commercial and residential. The residential floors were above floor 20. Most of those residents had been notified and were self-evacuating via the eastern stairwell, which thermal imaging confirmed was still clear. Most of them. That word, most, was the word that would matter. Chief Warren Briggs was running command from his white vehicle on the west side of the building. Briggs had 24 years on the job. He was methodical, deliberate, experienced. He had seen buildings like this eat firefighters alive when teams pushed too deep into compromised structures. He had pulled bodies out of collapses that came without warning. He had learned, the hardest way a person learns anything, that courage and structural physics were 2 completely separate things, and that one did not override the other. At 6:47, when the thermal imaging unit reported that the floor 10 and 11 ceilings were showing temperature spikes consistent with imminent failure, Briggs made the call. "All interior crews evacuate to below floor 12. Repeat, no personnel above floor 12. The structure above the burn zone is compromised. Command has declared a defensive posture on floors 12 and above. All interior crews acknowledge and withdraw." The acknowledgments came in one by one, team by team. Every crew that was working above the fire line was coming down. The last team cleared floor 14 at 6:53, and that is when Danny Kowalski heard it. He was standing on the sidewalk, about 40 feet back from the building's east face, in the staging area where probationary members were typically positioned during large incidents, close enough to observe, far enough to stay out of the way. He was watching the smoke push out of a broken window on floor 9 when he heard it. 3 taps. A pause, 2 taps. A pause, 3 taps again. He turned his head. The pattern repeated. Faint, rhythmic, deliberate. He knew that pattern. He knew exactly what it meant, where it was coming from, and why no one else had heard it. Because every other person in a 30-foot radius was talking into radios, shouting status updates, running hose, or managing the controlled chaos of a multi-alarm response. The noise of the scene swallowed everything. But Danny had been standing still and quiet, the way he almost always was, and he had heard what the noise couldn't swallow. Someone was alive on floor 37. He stood absolutely motionless for 4 seconds, 4 full seconds in which he understood the complete geometry of what he was facing. The chief had given a direct order. The structure above floor 12 was declared compromised. Going up meant disobeying a direct order on a large-scale incident, which was a fireable offense. It possibly meant walking into a building that could collapse around him. It meant using a stairwell that may or may not be viable above the smoke layer. It meant doing the thing that the textbook said you did not do, that Cortez had been drilling into the crew for 8 months, that every senior firefighter within earshot would tell him was exactly the kind of suicidal rookie mistake that got people killed. He also knew that someone was alive on floor 37 and that no one else had heard them, and that the evacuation was being declared complete. He turned and walked to the apparatus, quickly, deliberately. He pulled his SCBA mask fully onto his face and seated the seal. He checked his air gauge. 45 minutes, full cylinder. He pulled 2 additional items from his coat pocket that he always carried and that nobody had ever asked him about. A small, high-intensity tactical light clipped to his shoulder strap, and a compact folded piece of paper on which he had written, in small, neat numbers, the construction specifications for every high-rise building in the Central Response District, including the Harwick Tower. He had written those specifications from memory, because he had memorized them, because that is what he did, quietly and without announcement, on the nights when the rest of the crew was watching television in the common room. He started moving toward the east stairwell entrance. Kowalski. He stopped. Cortez was 10 feet behind him, coming around the front of the engine, a radio in one hand and an expression that could have stopped traffic. "Where do you think you're going?" Danny turned to face him. "Floor 37, Lieutenant. There's a survivor. Tapping pattern on the east face, 3rd window from the right, 323. It's a distress signal." Cortez stared at him, an entire sentence formed on his face that his mouth never delivered. Then he said flatly, "The chief declared defensive posture above floor 12. You're not going anywhere." "I heard the taps, Lieutenant. You heard wind in a window frame. It happens in high-rise fires. It sounds like..." It was a 3-2-3 pattern, repeated 3 times in 11 seconds. Wind doesn't repeat in 11-second intervals. Someone is alive up there. Cortez took a step toward him. His voice dropped. "Kowalski, do you understand what I will do to your career if you take one more step toward that building against a direct command order?" Danny looked at him for a moment. Something moved across his face. Not defiance. Something quieter and more absolute than defiance. Something that had been waiting a very long time to be where it was. "Yes, Lieutenant," he said. "I understand." He turned and walked into the building. Cortez stood there for exactly 3 seconds. Then he was on the radio. "Command, this is Cortez. I've got a Probie who just entered the east stairwell against orders. He's claiming survivor signal on floor 37. I need..." Chief Briggs's voice came back immediately, tight and controlled. "Get him out of there, Cortez." "I'm trying, sir. He's already inside." A pause on the radio that lasted longer than it should have. "Floor 37, Briggs said, and his voice had changed slightly in a way that Cortez couldn't quite interpret in the moment. "Did you say floor 37? "Affirmative." Another pause. "What was the signal pattern?" Cortez hesitated. He said 323. A long silence on the command channel. "Cortez," Briggs said finally. "Follow him." Cortez was already moving. The east stairwell was clear to floor 15. Danny had known it would be. The Harwick Tower's eastern stairwell was on the opposite side of the building from the fire origin point, separated by the full width of the building and a concrete utility corridor that ran floor to floor, serving as both a chase for mechanical systems and an inadvertent fire break. He had noted this in the construction specifications. He had noted it again when the building plans were displayed on a monitor at the command vehicle, and he had spent 40 seconds memorizing the relevant details before anyone told him to step back. The smoke started at floor 16, thin, acrid, biting even through his mask. He pulled the SCBA tight and kept climbing. His legs were burning by floor 20. His air gauge read 38 minutes. He passed floor 22, and the smoke thickened. Visibility dropped to roughly 12 feet. He stayed close to the wall, one hand dragging along the concrete, counting landings by feel. Floor 26, 27, 28. The building shuddered once, deep and resonant, somewhere below him. He stopped, listened, felt the vibration dissipate, kept climbing. Floor 30, floor 32. His air gauge read 31 minutes, floor 35, 36. He pushed through the door at floor 37. The floor was a residential level. An open common corridor ran the length of the building, east to west, lined with apartment doors. The smoke was lighter here than it had been in the stairwell. The building's mechanical ventilation had pushed the smoke column up through the center of the structure, leaving the peripheral corridors relatively breathable. His thermal imaging camera, the one he'd clipped to his wrist turnout before entering, showed nothing in the corridor. No heat bloom. No thermal figure. He turned east. Third window from the right. That's where the tapping had come from. Apartment 3711. He knocked twice, hard. Fire department, is anyone in there? Nothing. He knocked again, 3 times harder. Fire department, I heard you. Knock back if you can. Silence. And then, faint and deliberate and unmistakable, 3 taps. A pause, 2 taps, a pause, 3 taps. He tried the handle. Locked. He didn't break stride. His shoulder hit the door at full force, 192 pounds of gear and controlled momentum, and the frame gave on the second impact. The apartment was thick with smoke. Not the roiling black smoke of a room on fire, but the gray, suffocating smoke of a building that was feeding the fire somewhere else and breathing its byproduct up through the walls. A person could lose consciousness in this in under 12 minutes. He swept the apartment in a systematic grid. Kitchen clear, living room clear, bathroom. She was in the bathroom. An elderly woman, and he would learn her name was Evelyn Marsh, 81 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had lived in apartment 3711 for 19 years. She had closed herself in the bathroom when the smoke started coming under her front door, which was exactly the right instinct. She had placed wet towels at the base of the door, which was also exactly right. She had been tapping on the exterior bathroom wall, which shared its structure with the east face of the building, with the handle of a hairbrush, sending the pattern she had learned as a girl from her father, who had been a miner, and who had told her once, a very long time ago, that if you are ever trapped and someone might be listening, you tap 3, 2, 3. It was an old pattern, older than modern rescue protocols, a miner's distress call. Danny Kowalski had learned it from a book. He swept the room. Evelyn was semi-conscious, seated against the back wall of the bathroom, her breathing shallow and labored, no visible injuries. Her pulse was present and rapid. He got his mask off his own face and onto hers in 4 seconds, held the seal, and keyed his radio. Command, this is Kowalski. I am at floor 37, apartment 3711. I have 1 survivor, elderly female, conscious, smoke inhalation, ambulatory status unknown. I need an assist team to the east stairwell immediately, requesting confirmation that stairwell is still viable. The radio crackled. Chief Briggs's voice came back, and it was not the crisp command voice anymore. Something had broken through it. Kowalski, confirmed. East stairwell viable to floor 20. Assist team is moving. Cortez is on floor 28. He will reach you. Can you move the victim? Working on it, sir. Evelyn was looking at him through his mask. Her eyes were clear despite everything. She had the focused calm of someone who had already made peace with the worst and was now revising that assessment. Young man, she said, her voice muffled through the SCBA, how in the world did you hear me? I was listening, Danny said. He got her upright. She could bear weight on her right leg. The left was uncertain, trembling, but she could move with support. He got her arm around his neck and his arm around her waist, and they went into the corridor. Cortez came through the stairwell door at floor 37 40 seconds later. He was breathing hard, his mask fogged, and when he saw Danny in the corridor with Evelyn Marsh supported against his side, Something happened to his face that the hallway smoke made hard to read. He crossed the corridor in 5 strides. Without a word, he took Evelyn's other side, and the 3 of them started down. They cleared floor 37 at 7:22, 35 minutes after Danny had entered the building. They came out the east entrance at 7:41. When Danny emerged into the cold morning air with Evelyn Marsh breathing through the SCBA and Cortez on her other side, the paramedics were already there. They took her immediately. Oxygen mask, gurney, vitals running. Danny stood on the sidewalk and removed his helmet. Chief Briggs walked toward him. Warren Briggs, who had 24 years on the job, who had pulled bodies from collapses and made the hard calls and built his career on the principle that no order is given carelessly and no order is broken without consequence. He walked toward this 23-year-old Probie who had done exactly what he'd been told not to do, and he stopped 3 feet in front of him. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. 323, Briggs said finally. Yes, sir. You knew that pattern. I read about it, sir. Mining distress signal, pre-OSHA. Some of the older high-rise construction workers who built these buildings in the 70s and 80s knew it. I thought it was worth knowing. Briggs studied him for a moment that felt much longer than it was. You read the building specifications, too. The east stairwell is separated from the fire origin by the full building width and a utility corridor. The construction data suggested it would remain viable longer than the command estimate assumed. I thought the window was there. You thought the window was there, Briggs repeated slowly. He was not mocking the phrase. He was something else entirely. He was processing it. Cortez had come up behind Danny. He stood slightly to the side, and when Danny glanced at him, Cortez was looking at the pavement, his jaw set, his hands on his hips. How did you know that pattern? Cortez said. His voice was different. Something had gone out of it. I read about it. What else have you read about? Danny looked at him. A lot of things, Lieutenant. That might have been the end of it. An awkward vindication, a near miss with consequences, a Probie who had gotten lucky and would be quietly warned never to do it again. That might have been the story, but it wasn't, because Chief Briggs was still standing there, and he had something to say. Kowalski, how old are you? 23, sir. You came out of the academy 8 months ago. Yes, sir. Where were you before that? And there it was. The question Danny had been hoping and dreading and expecting for 8 months. The question he had answered on his application in the minimum number of words the form required. The question he had structured his entire behavior at Station 41 around never prompting. He breathed in once. He breathed out. I was a structural fire analyst with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, he said, for 4 years. Before that, I completed a master's degree in fire protection engineering at the University of Maryland. I left NIS to enter the fire service because I wanted to be in the buildings, not studying them. The silence on the sidewalk outside the Harwick Tower was a particular kind of silence, the kind that happens when a group of people simultaneously recalibrate everything they thought they understood about a situation. Cortez had gone very still. You have a master's degree in fire protection engineering, Briggs said. Yes, sir. And you have been working as a Probie for 8 months without mentioning any of this. My record was submitted with my application, sir. It was all there. Briggs turned briefly toward Cortez. Cortez said nothing. Why didn't you say anything? Briggs asked. When people were treating you like... He stopped. He was a precise man who chose his words carefully, and he was choosing carefully now. Why didn't you push back? Danny was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, what came out was not what anyone expected. I had a partner at NIST, he said, a senior analyst. His name was Marcus Webb. He was the best fire behavior analyst I've ever met. We were called in after a warehouse collapse in Baltimore 2 years ago. The fire had destroyed the structural supports on the west side, and the incident commander had been advised by an analyst on scene, not Marcus, someone else, that the east side was stable. Marcus disagreed. He pulled out the construction data, the same way I did today, and he told the IC that the east roof was also compromised. The IC followed the other analyst's assessment, not Marcus's, and when a search team went in on the east side, the roof came down. He stopped, swallowed. 3 firefighters died. Marcus went to the inquiry. He testified about what he had told the IC. He had the data. He was right. It made absolutely no difference to how those three families felt about what had happened. And Marcus spent the next year trying to figure out if there was something more he could have done, something he could have said differently, some way he could have been louder or clearer or better at making people listen. He retired 18 months ago. He was 41 years old. He was done. The morning sounds of the scene continued around them. Radios, engines, the distant hiss of water on a building that was now being suppressed from the outside. I can't talk. I came into the fire service, Danny said, because I thought that if I was actually inside the building, actually on the crew, I could make the decisions in real time instead of advising people who might not listen. But when I got here, I realized that a 23-year-old Probie with a master's degree is just as easy to ignore as an analyst on the phone, maybe easier. So I decided to learn how this world works before I started trying to change anything in it. Keep my head down, do the job, earn the trust, wait. Briggs looked at him for a very long time. Then he said, "That is either the most disciplined thing I've ever heard or the most frustrating." "Yes, sir," Danny said. "I know." Something moved across Briggs's face. It might have been the beginning of a smile, suppressed before it could arrive. He turned back toward the command vehicle, then stopped, turned halfway around, and said it over his shoulder. "I want you in my office tomorrow at 0800, Kowalski. Bring everything you know about this city's high-rise stock, every building, every construction spec, every structural vulnerability you've mapped, all of it." "Yes, sir," Danny said. Briggs walked away. The scene continued. Radios crackled. Cortez had not moved from where he was standing. He was still looking at the pavement, his helmet under his arm, the morning light hitting the creases in his turnout coat. "Kowalski," he said. Danny turned. Cortez raised his eyes. They were not the eyes of a man who was comfortable with what he was about to say, but they were the eyes of a man who understood it was necessary. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for the last 8 months. Lieutenant, don't." Cortez shook his head once, sharply. "Just let me say it. I made assumptions about you. I was wrong about you. And today, because you were right when I was wrong, an 81-year-old woman gets to go home. So," he exhaled through his nose, "I owe you an apology." Danny looked at him, the man who had called him the robot for 8 months, the man who had stood in the doorway of this burning building and told him no. "I understand why you made those assumptions, Lieutenant," Danny said. "I worked very hard to make them easy to make." Cortez looked at him for a moment, then he put his helmet back on his head and walked back toward the engine without another word. But as he passed, he clapped Danny once on the shoulder with a force that could have moved furniture. It was enough. Evelyn Marsh was transported to Northwestern Memorial Hospital with moderate smoke inhalation. She was treated, stabilized, and discharged after 26 hours. In the room at Northwestern, when she was well enough to speak at length, she told the attending nurse about the young firefighter who had found her. She said he had appeared in her doorway like something out of a fever dream, masked and enormous in his gear, and that the first thing she had thought, the very first thing, despite everything, despite the smoke and the fear and the certainty that she was about to die in her own bathroom, was that he had the calmest eyes she had ever seen on a young person. Like he had already been through something much worse, she said. She was not wrong. At Station 41, the story spread before Danny was back in the building. The way these things always spread in firehouses, in the exact same way fire spreads through a structure, faster than you think possible, finding every available channel, impossible to contain once started. By the time Engine 41 returned to quarters that afternoon, every person in the house knew approximately what had happened. By that evening, the story had reached 2 other stations in the district. By the end of the week, it had gone further than that. But what happened in Chief Briggs's office the next morning was the thing that changed everything. Danny came in at 8 o'clock exactly, carrying a binder that he set on Briggs's desk with the quiet of someone setting down something they had been carrying for a long time. It was 87 pages, organized by building height, construction era, and structural classification. every major high-rise in the Central Response District, every material specification he had been able to obtain through public records, engineering databases, and building department filings, every structural vulnerability he had identified, cross-referenced with fire behavior projections based on common ignition points for each building class. He had been compiling it for 8 months. He said nothing when he put it down. He just waited. Briggs opened it. He turned pages for a long time without speaking. He was a man who had made a career out of reading buildings from the outside. He was looking, for the first time, at what a man who could read them from the inside saw. When he finally looked up, he said one thing. "Why didn't you give this to me 8 months ago?" "Because 8 months ago, sir, you didn't know whether to trust my judgment." Briggs held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, slowly. "Fair," he said. He closed the binder and set it on the desk with care. "I'm putting you forward for a structural advisory role attached to Incident Command. You'll still run with the crew. Cortez is asked to keep you, which is notable because in 17 years he has never asked to keep anyone. But when we have a significant structure fire, I want you at command with me. I want those eyes on the building." Danny was quiet for a moment. 8 months of quiet, compressed into this moment. "Yes, sir," he said. "I would like that." The structural advisory role was formalized 30 days later. Within 90 days, it had expanded. Within 6 months, the department had used Danny's building analysis on 11 significant structure fires. And in 3 of those incidents, his assessment of structural viability had directly altered the tactical approach in ways that prevented potential firefighter casualties. The binder, expanded now, updated continuously, running to over 200 pages, became a training document. It was incorporated into the department's pre-incident planning protocol. And 18 months after the Harwick Tower fire, the Chicago Fire Department introduced a new mandatory curriculum for high-rise incident command. It was built around the principle that structural engineering data should be integrated into tactical decision-making from the first alarm, not after the fact. The curriculum was written collaboratively, but it was built on a foundation that a 23-year-old Probie had been quietly assembling for 8 months, while everyone around him called him the robot and thought he didn't know anything real. The curriculum was named the Webb Protocol. Danny had asked for that specifically, and Briggs had not asked him why, because by then he didn't have to. Evelyn Marsh came to the ceremony when the protocol was officially adopted. She sat in the front row in a blue coat and white gloves, and when Danny was introduced, she stood and clapped with the particular enthusiasm of someone who understood exactly what was being honored and why it mattered. Danny saw her from the podium. He nodded once. She nodded back. That was enough. There is something this story asks all of us to sit with, not just the drama of a burning building or the vindication of a young man everyone underestimated, but something older and quieter and more honest than that. Danny Kowalski was never invisible because he lacked ability. He was invisible because ability that doesn't announce itself tends to be overlooked by institutions that reward volume over depth, confidence over competence, and familiarity over expertise. He had watched what happened to Marcus Webb, a brilliant man who had been right, completely and verifiably right, and who had still lost 3 colleagues and eventually his career because being right was not sufficient when the people who needed to act on that rightness had already decided who to listen to. Danny had taken that lesson to heart in the most serious possible way. He had gone into the fire service not to prove something to anyone, but to be present in the moments that mattered, equipped with everything he had and trusted enough to act. The tap he heard on floor 37 was not luck. It was the product of a man who had trained himself to be still and quiet in the exact kind of environment that rewards those qualities least, and Evelyn Marsh went home because of it. Sometimes the person in the back of the room, the one who double-checks what everyone else already cleared, the one who reads the specifications nobody else thought to look at, the one who keeps quiet while they earn the trust they will eventually need, sometimes that person is the one who hears what nobody else can hear. And sometimes hearing it makes all the difference. Never measure a person's capability by how loudly they carry it. The ones who have already been through the fire rarely need to tell you. You find out when you need them most. If this story hit you the way it should, drop a comment below. Tell us, would you have heard those taps? Would you have gone up, or would the order have held you? We want to know what you think because the best conversations happen down there, and we read every single one. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Every week we bring you stories from the fireground, the emergency room, and the front lines of emergency response. Stories of ordinary people in extraordinary moments, doing things that deserve to be remembered. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you never miss one. And if someone in your life needs to hear this story today, a young person being overlooked, someone sitting quietly in the back of a room full of people who haven't figured them out yet, share this with them. Sometimes the most important thing you can give someone is proof that the waiting is worth it. We'll see you in the next one.